Hello, everybody. This is John Markowski, the Relationship News channel, if you happen to watch that. And I am here today to do a review of my very first handgun, the CZ75 Compact. But, as I have mentioned before on various videos, I am first and foremost a Reformed Christian. Before I'm a Second Amendment proponent, before I'm a gun enthusiast, before anything else, I am first and foremost a Reformed Christian. And because of that, the primary concern that I have is always going to be making sure that my worldview is in fact a biblical worldview. I am a biblical Christian. And one of the issues that comes up when we're talking about things like guns in Christianity is what exactly the position of Christianity on guns is. And I've talked about this in various videos. But one thing that Christians are often accused of being is pacifists. And biblically speaking, that position just simply isn't tenable. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go to a book of Acts in the Bible. That's what I have here is a Bible. Let's go to what is called the book of Acts. And technically it's the book of the Acts of the Apostles of Jesus Christ, but we usually just call it Acts. So we're going to go to the book of Acts, and we're going to start reading in chapter 10. And we're not going to go through everything here, because I just want to make a basic point. This isn't necessarily intended to be a sermon, just a basic point. So we're going to read the first, let's say, 8 verses of Acts chapter 10. This is what it says. At Caesarea, there was a man named Cornelius, a centurion of what was known as the Italian cohort, a devout man who feared God with all his household, gave alms generously to the people, and prayed continually to God. About the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God come in and say to him, Cornelius. And he stared at him in terror and said, What is it, Lord? And he said to him, Your prayers and your alms have ascended as a memorial before God. And now, send men to Joppa to bring one Simon, who is called Peter. That's Simon Peter the Apostle. So one Simon who is called Peter. He is lodging with one Simon, a tanner, whose house is by the sea. When the angel who spoke to him had departed, he called 2 of his servants and a devout soldier from among those who attended him. And having related everything to them, he sent them to Joppa. What's the significance of that account? This is the account of the first major Gentile conversion in New Testament history. Now, there were Gentile conversions that happened in the Old Testament of people who were not a part of the people of God, ethnically speaking, who weren't Israelites, who were taken into the covenant people. The covenant people of God was never race exclusive. It was normative for the people of God to be Israelites, but it wasn't exclusive even in the Old Testament. However, by the time we get to the New Testament time period, there's a lot of people who were of the opinion that what God was going to be doing going forward was going to be especially just for the Jews, just for the Israelites. And Jesus was reminding his apostles, no, you are to take this message to everyone. This message is for the whole world. And of course that had been predicted all the way back in the Old Testament, even to Abraham. God had told Abraham, who's the father of the Israelite nation, he was told that through him the nations of the entire earth would be blessed. It's not going to be just for your people, ethnically speaking. This is going to be for everyone. But people around the time of Jesus had the idea that all of this stuff was just going to be for them exclusively, and so you have this case where you have Cornelius receiving a vision from an angel of the Lord and being told to send for one of the apostles. And of course one of the apostles does come to him and preaches the gospel to him, and he and his household accept it, so on and so forth. It's the first major Gentile conversion in the New Testament. But what's interesting about Cornelius, this guy who has this vision and invites the apostle to come and speak to him, what's interesting about him is that he's a Roman centurion. He is a military man, and he's not just a common grunt. He's a guy who is in charge of other people, who would be involved in armed conflicts and sending people into armed conflicts. And what's interesting, you can read the rest of the account there in the book of Acts. What's interesting is that he's never called away from that life. He's never called away from a life of being a warrior. And yet he is the first Gentile Christian convert. That is an amazing statement. Obviously, early Christians were not of the opinion that you have to be a pacifist in order to be a Christian. They instead tended to separate the categories of their existence. That is, when it came to religion, were they a fan of advancing their religions through warfare? No, they weren't. They were never going to put the sword to somebody's neck and say, convert to Christianity or else. That certainly was not a part of the New Testament mindset. But the idea that you had to be a complete pacifist in order to be a Christian was completely foreign to them. Go back into the Old Testament, the people of God defended themselves many times and went to war many times. They were not pacifists. And so coming into the New Testament, the idea that you wouldn't be a pacifist was completely normal. The issue was whether or not you advance the religion by means of warfare, and the answer was no. And the same thing applies to modern biblical Christians. We are just fine with the use of weapons, with being even soldiers, carrying weapons for self-defense, so on and so forth, but we draw the line at saying that you can advance your religion through warfare. But in terms of self-defense, in terms of even being a person of war, no. Just as Cornelius was a man of war who would have carried a sword with him basically everywhere that he went, and he was still a Christian, so we would say the same applies to modern biblical Christians. So are modern biblical Christians who are bound to Scripture bound to be pacifists? The answer is no. The first Gentile conversion that we see in the New Testament was of someone who was definitely not a pacifist. He was a Roman centurion. He was a man of the sword. That's how he lived his life. He was a weapons keeper, a weapons user, and he was a man of war. But he was a Christian at the same time. All right. So, that discussion being aside, let's go ahead and get into the gun review. Like I said, this was my very first gun. In fact, it was this very gun that I first bought as a handgun, my very first handgun. Technically, my very first gun was a .22 long rifle. It was one of the Smith & Wesson models. It's an M&P 1522, 22 LR rifle. It's basically made to look like an AR-15, but it's just a .22. That was my very first gun, but my very first handgun was this one, CZ75 Compact. Now, as is always a good habit, let's go ahead and safety check it. As you can see, there's no magazine inside of it. And then after we see that there's no magazine, we need to check the chamber. So go ahead and pull back on the slide and lock it open. To lock it open, I just pushed down on the slide release, slide stop button right here. So I'm trying to be careful about where I point the gun because I live in an apartment and there are people above me and I don't want to point the barrel up at them. But I was just pushing down on this button with my thumb in order to lock it open. Let's make sure that it's stable, it's not going to come flying forward. Put my finger in there to make sure that the chamber area is empty, and indeed it is. So this is a safe gun. And so perfectly safe. We can discuss it in complete safety. I also have a magazine here, but as you can see, there's a blue follower right there. There are no rounds loaded in this, so everything that we're dealing with is rounds free, so we are completely safe right now. All right, let's go ahead and talk about the pros and cons of the gun. We'll start with the cons, kind of like I did for the Bersa review. Negatives, things that I don't like about it. Okay, first of all, let me say that this is actually a very good gun. But there's a reason why people do not generally carry guns like this around anymore. This is a 9mm, by the way, in case you're wondering. CZ75 Compact in 9mm. But there are reasons, like I said, why people don't carry it. One of the first reasons why people don't carry guns like this is because this is heavy. This is a steel frame gun. It's 32 point some odd ounces unloaded. And so when you're carrying it around, that's a lot of weight to have on you. And when I first got the gun, I was primarily concerned about something that would be fun to shoot. I wasn't super concerned about carrying it. When I carried it, I would usually just stuff it in a cargo pants pocket, and that's all that I would do with it for for carry. I wasn't overly concerned about inside the waistband carry or anything like that, or something that would be really concealable. Cargo pants pocket was just fine for me, so that was sufficient for the task. But if you do want to go to a more concealed kind of carry, an actual inside the waistband carry or something like that, or appendix carry or something like that, you're going to find this thing to be rather awkward to carry. First of all, like I said, it's pretty heavy, and so for carrying it, that's not so fun because you're carrying around a 2-pound weight everywhere you go. A lot of more modern guns, a lot of polymer frame guns are of course considerably lighter, and so if you're going to be wearing this thing around all day, lighter tends to be better. Another issue is just some of the overall shape issues. For the most part, it's not bad, but one area where the shape will definitely inhibit your carrying of it is this tang on the backside. If you decide to do in the waistband carry, this tang can dig into you pretty aggressively. This tang is great for when you're shooting it. It keeps all the action of gun well clear of your hand. It's good for that. But when you're carrying it, that tang, up against your flesh, it's going to dig into you pretty much every time you bend over any possible way. So it's heavy. That tang will dig into you. Those kinds of things make it into a gun that's not greatly conducive to carrying. And then there's also one other thing about it that I found that was not so great either. It is a fairly heavy gun, which helps manage total recoil, but most of that weight is in the frame. The slide, of course, with it being a CZ, it has a reverse rail system on it, but the slide itself is actually relatively small and there's not a whole lot of weight there. And so what that means is that the gun tends to be very snappy. You have a 9mm in there. 9mm can be kind of snappy anyways, but you have a 9mm round in there, goes off. It's not a huge gun. This is about roughly the size of a Glock 19. Not a very big gun, not a whole lot of distance of travel here. The round goes off. All that energy comes back in the slide, and it kind of stops short. It doesn't have a whole lot of weight to it, and so the slide comes back very quickly, and then it stops short because it's not a very long stroke either. And 9mm isn't a very big round in the first place, so you don't need to go super far back. And so it tends to stop short and carries with it more energy, and it kind of wants to jump back on you. It tends to be fairly snappy because of that. Now the whole gun, including that frame, is pretty heavy, so it's not like it's going to jump out of your hand, but it is going to feel pretty snappy. It's going to jerk on your hand pretty quickly and pretty hard. And so in terms of shooting it, if you're someone who's recoil sensitive like I am, yes, it's better than some guns in that it's fairly heavy and so it's not going to jump out of your hand, but that snappiness can become a bit of an issue and you'll develop a bit of a flinch. And so I'm actually not super accurate with this gun. I'm accurate enough, and that's not a fault of the gun. The gun's actually very accurate in and of itself. The problem is I'm not accurate, and especially because I'm recoil sensitive and this gun tends to be a little on the snappy side, it combines to making it a little bit less wieldy than other guns. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about, and by the way, my neighbors through the wall over there are not home, so I can do this safely. I wanted to talk about the sights there. It is technically a 3-dot system, but as you can see, those dots are fairly hard to pick up. They're not very bright. These are the green phosphorus glow-in-the-dark sights that CZ makes, and unfortunately these sights fade with time, and if you do any regular carry with them, they get rubbed up against things and they kind of wear out. And so for me, it's at the point where these sights just kind of wash into the background and I can't really pick them up very well at all. And so that contributes to accuracy issues. So between it being fairly snappy, yes, it is a heavy gun, it's not going to jump out of your hand or anything like that, but the slide itself is relatively low weight, relatively short draw stroke, and so it tends to make the gun snappy. Combine that with some sights that I personally have a hard time picking up, and it's not going to be the most accurate gun for me. So those are some drawbacks. Another drawback is the way that this particular gun operates as far as safety is concerned. This is a double single action gun. However, it really isn't made with the double action capacity in mind. It can do it, but it takes a little bit of doing. Let me show you what I mean. So you go ahead and you stick a magazine in there, you rack around, and then it brings the hammer all the way back like it normally would. And if this was like a lot of other double single action guns, you would have a decocking mechanism somewhere on the gun that you'd hit, and then that hammer would come forward to decock the gun. Excuse me. This gun does not have a decocking mechanism. Instead, it has a traditional safety. So what this is basically the 9mm version of the 1911. In a lot of ways, this is the 1911 of the 9mm world. This is one of the very first relatively high capacity 9mm guns that ever developed, was the CZ75. And of course, this is its later little brother, the CZ75 Compact. But it holds a lot of those traditional features in common. And so, like a lot of the older semi-autos, it was designed to have the hammer all the way back, and then you activate the safety, and that's how it was meant to be carried, is cocked and locked. And when that safety is in place, the trigger is locked up, can't pull the trigger, and then the slide is locked up, and then there's also a drop safety inside of the slide. And so even if the hammer should come forward for some reason, it happens to land on something that breaks the hammer and pushes it into the firing pin, as long as that firing pin block is in place, it's not going to go off. So it's kind of triple safe. The trigger can't be pulled, the slide can't be operated, the hammer in and of itself isn't going to do anything because of the drop safety. And so it's a very safe way to carry the gun, especially if you have a good holster for it. But the whole reason why you have a double action gun in the first place is so that you don't have to have that safety. And this safety isn't a very strong safety, just as easy as that, just swiping my hand across it, I took it off. So if you happen to be carrying it in a place or in such a way that it could rub up against clothing or whatnot, or rub up against pretty much anything, you could accidentally deactivate that safety, and then the trigger pull, once that safety is off, isn't very heavy. It's like maybe 4.5 pounds, something like that. It goes off pretty easily. And so unless you're actually carrying it in a dedicated holster, the fact that that safety is easy to disengage becomes a little bit of a liability. And that's part of the whole issue of having a double action gun, is you don't have to rely on the safety. Instead, you can put the hammer forward, the trigger becomes a lot harder to pull, and then that acts as your safety. Acts a lot like a revolver does. Most revolvers, double action revolvers I should say, have a very long, relatively difficult trigger pull. And that's kind of what this was designed to emulate. But like I said, there's no decocking mechanism, there's just the safety. So how do you decock it? Well, once you're racked around and the hammer's all the way back, you have two options basically. Either I can grab the hammer with my thumb, pull the trigger, release the trigger, and then let my thumb go forward so that the hammer goes to its half-cock position, which is normal for CZs. They usually have some kind of a half-cock that's for their double action pull, and then operate it that way. And then the first trigger pull will be a relatively hard, deliberate, long trigger pull, and that's what you want. And this one's roughly in the neighborhood of about 8 pounds, which I consider to be fairly ideal for a double action pull. And then of course after that, the hammer's going to go all the way back once the slide operates, and then you get about a 4.5 pound trigger pull, and it's normal from there. But that whole having to put your thumb on the hammer, pull the trigger while there's a live round in the chamber, and then drop the hammer to its half-cock position from there, really makes people a lot of nervous. All kinds of nervous. That you're pulling the trigger on a loaded gun in order to decock it. Not ideal. And that you can't get around. But what you can do is you can make the hammer drop process a little bit safer. So from the hammer being all the way back, another thing you can do is just stick your thumb in there, pull the trigger, release, and then just roll your thumb out of the way, and that's a lot safer. But you're still pulling the trigger on a loaded gun. And that's something that I really don't like about it. Now, I have carried it this way before. I'll put it in my cargo pants pocket, like I said, with a little sleeve to cover the kind of the sharp pointy edges on the gun, and that's how I carried it for the longest time. I really wasn't overly concerned about concealed carry, and so having something that was in my cargo pants pocket was the most convenient. It's an easy place to carry things, and so for the longest time this worked. As I started looking into concealed carry a little bit more, I quickly realized that, well, not super quickly realized, but came to realize that that was not a good carry system just in terms of time to engagement. If you have a gun in your cargo pants pocket, it's going to take you a little while to get it out. It's not impossible, of course, but you're looking at more like a 2 or a 3 second draw stroke, where ideally you would want to have 1 second or less draw stroke. And so I very naturally converted over to an inside the waistband carry system, which is a lot faster. All I have to do is just lift my shirt a little bit, grab the gun, and I'm ready to go. That's a much shorter draw stroke than having to go all the way down to my cargo pants pocket, undo the Velcro or the zipper or whatever I have on the cargo pants pocket, and then pull out the gun and present it. Inside the waistband was just faster. But like I said, this is not a good inside the waistband gun. It's heavy. That tang will dig into you, and then there are safety concerns with doing it in double action mode, just because you have to pull the trigger and drop the hammer with a live round in the chamber. It's doable, and like I said, if you put your thumb in there and you pull the trigger, nothing's going to happen because your thumb is in the way, so it's fairly safe in that regard, but it's really not ideal. The reason why they made double action guns is so that you wouldn't have to have that safety on and rely on that safety, because the safety can be swiped off. And then also, if you ever do have to use the gun and you have it in a cocked and locked configuration, you just can't pull out the gun and start shooting because you have the safety on. So you have to remember to disengage the safety and then shoot. People quickly found out that having to remember to take off the safety was definitely a liability. Lots of people have forgotten to take the safety off, both in recreational, just general recreational use, going to the range, going to shoot at the target and finding out that the safety is still on, but also in real-world self-defense encounters. Cocked and locked guns have become a liability for people. The bad guy shows up and it's in the cocked and locked and people start firing and nothing happens. Well, safety's still on, and then you have to get back into the fight and you lose time, which means that, especially if the other person is armed, you could very easily lose your life. And so cocked and locked pretty quickly was revealed to be a major liability. So double action came along, but the double action, so you don't have to have the safety on, you have a long, deliberate, hard trigger pull as your safety, basically. That was a better option that way. But with this particular gun, you have to pull the trigger on a loaded chamber in order to carry a double action. So it wasn't great in that regard. Okay, and that's why I eventually wound up stop using this as my normal everyday carry gun. It's heavy. If you're going to carry it in a way that makes it quickly accessible but still concealable, that tang is definitely going to get in the way. The sights on it, when you're at the range, practicing against paper targets, you can afford to take as much time to line up your sights as you want to. But the one thing that these sights are definitely not is easy to pick up in all lighting conditions. Like I said, these particular sights have started to fade, and overall they're just not the best sights on the face of the planet. And then there's also the safety concern of, if you do decide to carry a double action, having to pull the trigger with a live round in the chamber definitely makes a lot of people nervous, including myself. So all of that meant I eventually stopped carrying it. Now, as for what it was originally designed for, though, it was designed basically as a duty weapon. This is the compact version. It wasn't designed as a duty weapon, but the full-size version was designed as a duty weapon, and it was designed to be carried in an exterior holster with some kind of a retention strap to make sure that people couldn't just yank it out from you. And in that regard, in that purpose of use, in that way of carrying it, it makes a lot more sense. If you have a truly dedicated outside the waistband holster, the whole cocked and locked thing isn't such a big issue, and as long as you're trained that when you grab the gun, your thumb sweeps down on that safety and you're ready to go, the safety isn't that huge of a concern. And then for the full-size versions of the gun, the regular CZ75s usually have a little bit better sights on it, so that part is mitigated. And of course, on bigger gun, you have a bigger slide, and so it doesn't tend to be quite as snappy. All those make it, for an outside the waistband carry gun, pretty ideal, pretty good. But this compact version for carry, not so much. But reason why I bought it, going on to the pro side of it, is because as far as just a fun, easy gun to shoot, it fits all the basic requirements. First thing I noticed about it was just how nice the handle is on it. It has a wonderfully comfortable grip. Anyone who's held a CZ75 knows how comfortable these grips are and how good it feels in the hand. And this is the stock grips. These are not any aftermarket grips whatsoever. This is just the stock grips that it comes with. Very comfortable. Very, very, very comfortable, especially for a one-handed hold. Also, on the front, there is a little serrated pad, so for people like me who do prefer to put one finger around the trigger guard and then hold it like that way, hold it like that to fire to kind of keep control of the muzzle. And like I said, this gun tends to be a little bit snappy, so you want to control the muzzle if you can. It has that option. It has a good spot for that. And then the trigger pull on this gun is very nice. It reminds me a lot of a revolver, a double single action revolver trigger pull. So if you have it in a double action mode, yeah, that first one is going to be harder and longer, but it's a very smooth trigger pull. And it releases very consistently, and it's hard, but it's not overly hard. It's about 8 pounds. And then once you get it down into single action, it's pretty short and crisp. And then the reset on it is kind of long. Let me see if I can do the reset again for you guys in a way that you'll be able to see. So it is kind of a long reset, but for a self-defense gun, duty gun, something like that, it's not bad. And very, very, very smooth action trigger. Like I said, very, very reminiscent of the double single action revolver. Absolutely love that about it. Overall, it's a heavy gun, so it's not going to jump out of your gun. It is snappy because the slide has so little weight. But overall, good recoil management. It's not going to jump out of your hand because it weighs 2 freaking pounds. 32 plus ounces unloaded, so loaded it's going to weigh even more. So as far as general handling characteristics, you know, trade out for some better sights, something like that. At the range, fantastic gun to have. Not as good to carry, but out at the range, a gun like this is great to have. And that's mostly why I originally bought it, was for recreation. Concealed carry, self-defense was a secondary thing. It's capable of self-defense, but primarily why I got it is because I wanted a 9mm that would be fun to shoot. And I got 9mm because 9mm rounds are really cheap. And so I could feed my baby relatively cheaply, and that's still true. One thing I did want to mention about this particular one is that this one came with 15-round magazines. That's not normal. These CZ75 compacts usually come with 14-round flesh-fitting magazines. These ones stick out just a little bit, and they carry 15 rounds, which I like. It gives it basically the same capacity as a Glock 19, which is nice that way around, but that does work. And also, as far as being able to work on it, CZ75s are great because they're a very classic design. They have a true Browning system in them as far as the recoil, as far as how the gun itself operates with the slide coming back and all that. It has true locking lugs and all those kinds of things. So it's a true Browning system. And the components on it are relatively simple. CZ75s have been around, well, since '75, and basically everybody knows how to work on them, and you can find directions on how to work on them pretty much from anywhere. Which brings me to back to one negative that I forgot, is that in this hole, I don't know how well you guys can see it, in this hole there is a retaining pin. And the retaining pin that it comes with is a roll pin. It's hollow. And if you're like me, that becomes a liability, because I like to dry fire my guns a lot. And that's kind of my opinion on center fire guns, is you should be able to dry fire them. That roll pin that was in there, it broke. And so what I wound up doing is, from an aftermarket provider, CZ Custom, I got a solid roll pin to put in there. And very easy to do. It just need a punch and a hammer, and of course the replacement part, things like that. But it's not very difficult to do at all. Just knock the old pin out, put the new pin in, and was good to go. And now I can dry fire it as much as I like, and it's not going to hurt anything, because now it has a solid pin in there. It's not going to do anything. It's great that way. That's the only repair work that I've had done to the gun, is just that retaining pin. Swapped out the hollow roll pin for a completely solid retaining pin, and that's all the work that I've ever had done to this gun, ever. And I've had hundreds, if not thousands, of rounds through it now, and it still works just fine. It's not too bad on taking it apart. I'm not going to do it now, but like most CZs, there's a little line here that you match up with a line that's on the frame, pull it back there, and then this little pin right here you push through, and then you can take off the slide, and it's fairly normal disassembly from there. So in terms of ease, I would say it's easier than a 1911 to take apart, but not as easy as a Glock. So it's not super easy, but it's not super hard either. It's certainly not prohibitive. So relatively easy takedown. Like I said, I love the trigger. The fact that it's a fairly heavy gun keeps it from jumping in your hand. Like I said, it is snappy because the slide doesn't have a whole lot of weight, but still decent recoil management just because it's so heavy. Terrific feel in the hand, and like I said, everybody knows how to take these things apart and work on them, and it's easy to get aftermarket parts for them. So if you need to fix something, replace something, anything like that, completely doable, not very difficult at all. There's lots of places that make these. The two biggest ones in America are Cajun Gun Works and CZ Custom. I have personally had the best experiences with CZ Custom. That's where my support goes, and where I usually spend my money whenever I have an issue with a CZ product. Not that there are many, but when I do want to do upgrades, or if a roll pin happens to break, that's where I go. So durable gun, lasts long, all those kinds of things. The biggest issue is that it's just not really an ideal concealed carry gun. And a lot of it has to do with that tang, and also just the fact that it's a 2-pound gun. Other than that, though, it is still pretty awesome, and I like it. It just doesn't fit the self-defense role as well as some other guns do. That's all that there is to it. That's the only reason why I'm not regularly carrying it anymore. Is that it's not that it's bad, it's just that there are better guns that are out there that I have adopted. And so this one, I still like taking it to the range, I still like shooting it and all those things, but as far as everyday carry, no, just because it's been outclassed. There are better guns on the market for that now. But for what it is, and certainly for what it was, it is a good gun. And like I said, if you go into a gun store and you ask to feel one, you're definitely going to fall in love with that grip. There's nothing quite like a CZ75 grip. They always feel awesome. No matter who you are, one of the things that people always love about it is just how nice that handle feels in your hand. And it doesn't matter what size hand you have either. Almost any size hand coming around that grip just feels completely awesome. And one of the things I liked about it when I first got it was just the fact that this slide, even though it's small and it makes it a little bit snappy, that high slide makes it so that you can get a really high purchase on the gun, a pretty high grip on the gun, without having to worry about the slide catching your skin in any way. So when this gun operates, that tang on the back protects your hand from hammer bite and all those kinds of things, and of course the slide is pretty high compared to that, and so even if it rotates in your hand, it's still not going to catch you or anything like that. So as far as an auto load or a semi-auto for a new shooter, this is really great because it's really hard to accidentally catch yourself on something with this gun. It's not going to give you a slide bite, it's not going to give you hammer bite or anything like that. So like I said, yeah, it's not an ideal concealed carry gun, but for someone's first auto loader to shoot, it's not a bad option. It really isn't. Yeah, like I said, it's just a very forgiving gun, feels great in the hand. Almost impossible for this gun to give you any kind of serious slide bite or hammer bite or anything like that, just because of the way that it's designed. And that's initially what drew me to it. It's a very easy gun to operate, very safe gun to operate. So if you're going to learn how to use an auto loader at the range, something like this is a pretty good option. And like I said, I still like it. I especially love that trigger. It is just so smooth compared to a lot of other triggers, and even on other CZs. And even when it's in a double action mode, and yeah, it's a heavy trigger, but it is a very smooth trigger. And in single action, it's still a relatively smooth trigger. It's great. As far as cost, you'll usually find these guns in the low 500s to mid 500s, at least in the area that I am. Your area may vary. And for the money, I would say it's a good buy. It's just, in terms of concealed carry, there are better guns that are out there now. And also, like I said, the sights do wear out, and so that is something to consider. And by the way, these sights are not easy to change. These ones are dovetailed in. They don't have any set screws or anything like that. There's actually a particular tool that you basically have to use in order to punch these through, because just taking a normal punch and a hammer doesn't move these. I've tried. That's why these are kind of dinged up, is try to move it out. It's not easy to move. You need the actual tool for it and those kinds of things. And so the sights on this thing are not great. And if you plan on relying on the sights, yeah, you'll probably want to upgrade. So good gun, but sadly it's not as good as others. That's the problem with it. But I still like it. My first handgun, I still consider it to be a really great autoloader to learn on, just in terms of handling characteristics, not giving a slide bite or anything like that. Heavy enough that it stays in the hand. Yeah, it's snappy, but it still stays in the hand real well. All those kind of things, great, just not good for concealed carry. All right, so thank you for letting me take you down a walk on memory lane of my CZ75 Compact, my very first semi-auto handgun, and letting me relive the moments, as it were. Thank you. Bye-bye.